All right, think about this. Most ancient civilizations that lose their physical homeland, they usually vanish. They just assimilate and disappear. But today, we're jumping into an explainer that looks at the exact opposite. We're breaking down the mechanics of cultural survival through Morris H. Harris's incredible work, 1,000 Years of Jewish History. And look, this isn't just a dry timeline of dates. We're diving deep into the sheer improbability of how identity, heritage, and tradition actually managed to survive against literally all the odds. So, the massive question driving our entire explainer today is this. How exactly does a culture survive centuries of displacement? Just wrap your head around that scale for a second. We're talking about a community watching the Roman Empire crumble, witnessing the rise of the Islamic Golden Age, and navigating the crazy political shifts of medieval Europe, all while keeping their unique identity completely intact. It's honestly one of the ultimate puzzles in human history, outlasting the very empires that are actively trying to conquer or scatter you.
To figure that out, we're unpacking this 1,000-year stretch into four main themes. First, the long historical journey. Second, tradition and intellectual scholarship. Third, resilience and cultural survival. And finally, a lasting global influence. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the long historical journey, where we'll look at how this community navigated shifting empires and massive geographic dispersion. Now, there's a wild paradox here. On one hand, you've got undeniable hardship. Centuries of severe political upheaval, persecution, forced exile, the whole shebang. But at the exact same time, you have this unbelievable flourishing of culture. Despite the intense pressure, these communities were building massive centers of learning, commerce, and art. Take the golden age of Jewish culture in Spain, for example. Right in the middle of shifting political sands, you've got poets, scholars, and viziers totally thriving and driving cultural innovation at the highest levels. It's this remarkable parallel track of intense struggle paired with just immense achievement. And navigating those constantly changing empires is actually what forged such an unbroken identity. Because they didn't have a central geographic state, they did something absolutely genius. They essentially built a portable homeland. Their laws, their customs, their daily rhythms, they weren't tied to a physical capital or a standing army anymore. Instead, they anchored themselves to a shared calendar, communal practices, and living texts. They literally learned to carry their entire civilization in their minds, no matter whose empire they happened to be living in.
So, how exactly do you pack up and move an entire identity? That brings us to Section 2, tradition and intellectual scholarship, and the actual day-to-day mechanisms of their survival. Well, since they couldn't rely on physical borders, which, let's face it, were completely out of their control anyway, they built fortresses of the mind. It all started with this rigorous, community-wide obsession with education and religious study from an incredibly young age. This fueled the strict preservation of their written traditions. Those texts and those debates, that became their territory. By shifting their ultimate loyalty from a physical piece of land to shared knowledge, they basically bulletproofed their continuity, even when the political world was turning upside down. And hey, this scholarship wasn't just inward-looking either. They were out there actively transforming major fields: philosophy, theology, law, science, literature, you name it. Think about a heavyweight like Maimonides in the 12th century, who brilliantly fused ancient Greek philosophy with Islamic theology and Jewish law. Or consider the crucial advancements in cartography and astronomy that later European explorers completely relied on. They were deep into cultural exchange, dynamically adapting to the world around them, but, and this is key, keeping their core identity 100% intact. Maurice Harris hits the nail on the head in the text, noting that the emphasis on learning helped maintain continuity, even during periods of displacement and political uncertainty. I mean, think about it. Learning was the ultimate anchor. When your property gets confiscated, when your political standing vanishes overnight, and when you just can't trust the map, the knowledge in your head and the traditions you teach your kids, absolutely nobody can take that away from you. Building on that intellectual bedrock, we hit Section 3, resilience and cultural survival. Let's look at how this community actually functioned under all that real-world pressure. So, cultural continuity is a really delicate balancing act. It's all about a minority culture preserving its unique internal identity while still actively interacting with massive external political systems. They weren't just walling themselves off as hermits. Far from it. They were trading along the Silk Road, doing business in Mediterranean ports, speaking the local languages. But at the end of the day, they always returned to their own distinct legal and social rhythms. It's the absolute genius of engaging with the macroeconomy without letting the macro culture erase who you are. When you distill Harris's work, you get these four unbreakable threads that weave the whole story together.
First, resilience, just the sheer grit required to survive historical hardship. Second, identity, the active preservation of heritage. Third, scholarship, that crucial focus on education we've been talking about. And fourth, community, keeping faith and society deeply connected across entire continents. Honestly, a merchant in Spain and a scholar in Babylon might never cross paths, but because of these four threads, they were operating in the exact same cultural universe. Because they held so firmly onto these pillars, this entire historical experience acts as a total masterclass in collective memory. It's exactly why historians and sociologists obsess over this journey. It is the gold standard for diaspora survival. It proves, without a doubt, that a shared narrative and a commitment to having each other's backs are vastly stronger binding agents than any physical border or standing army. It is literally a blueprint for how heritage outlasts empires. Which brings us to the ultimate result of this whole journey in our final section, a lasting global influence, and how these traditions helped fundamentally shape world civilization. The ripple effects here are just undeniable. From foundational concepts of art, ethics, and justice, to massive contributions in commerce, music, and political thought, their adaptability enriched everybody. A massive piece of this was intercultural exchange. Jewish translators were absolutely vital in translating classical Greek text into Arabic and then later into Latin. They basically preserved the knowledge that kicked off the European Renaissance. They didn't just quietly survive history, they actively helped write it. The source material sums it up beautifully, stating that Jewish history remains deeply significant because it reflects both the challenges and achievements of cultural survival across changing historical conditions. And that's the real takeaway here. Studying this isn't just about chronicling some distant past. It provides a powerful, universal lens. For any community facing rapid change, displacement, or the threat of cultural erasure, this history shows us exactly what it takes to adapt and thrive when the world completely shifts under your feet. So I want to leave you with this one provocative thought. What can 1,000 years of history teach us about our own cultural resilience today? Think about everything we just unpacked. The power of tradition, that intense focus on scholarship, the strength of a fiercely connected community. In our crazy, hyper-connected digital age where global cultures are colliding every single second, how might we use those exact same tools to protect our own identities? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.